Construction is a high-pressure, difficult job. And so I thought today on Construction Genius, we'd bring in someone who has an equally high-pressure and challenging job, perhaps more so, and that is a coroner. My guest today on Construction Genius is Harrison Firmage, and he is a deputy coroner in Yolo County, California. Harrison has almost a decade of experience in death investigations, and what he specializes in is having difficult conversations with people in crisis. You as a leader may have many such opportunities to one extent or another in construction, and so I thought we would bring Harrison onto the show to gain some insights from him, both into what he does as a death investigator, but how he handles people in a crisis situation. So, as I always say, enjoy my interview with Harrison and look for those insights that will help you to be a more effective leader, perhaps more compassionate, more empathetic, when you're having those difficult conversations. And also listen carefully, because he's going to give you some insights into how you can figure out whether or not people are lying, how to lay aside some of your own preconceived notions about people, and how to combine your intuition with facts to put together a picture of what's actually happening. Thank you again for listening to Construction Genius. Feel free to share this with other people that you think may benefit, and give me some feedback as well. If you find this episode useful, kind of out of the box from the typical guest on Construction Genius, let me know, and I'll look for other guests who can give us some insights from outside of the realm of construction. Enjoy my chat with Harrison. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Harrison, welcome to Construction Genius.
Glad to be here.
You're not my typical guest here on Construction Genius. I know that you have not an unusual line of work, but not a typical line of work. So just tell us a little bit about what you do for a living.
Sure. So I work as a deputy coroner for the Yolo County Sheriff's Office, and I handle death investigations that ultimately lead to me determining a manner of death for someone who's passed away that falls within the purview of my work. So someone outside of the care of a physician, or someone who's died in a unusual or violent manner, typically. And so I work alongside a pathologist who will assign a cause of death, and then I will determine a manner. Typically, manners are something like natural, accident, suicide, homicide. And that's ultimately what my job boils down to, is determining what manner of death it is.
I see. Okay. And so what are some of the most challenging aspects of your chosen profession?
Sure. Well, the scene investigations can be incredibly challenging. Just given the nature of the work, I see all manner of strange things, but ultimately it's all death investigations. So I see violent deaths. I see particularly unsettling or disgusting situations, because that's sort of within the purview of what I investigate. I don't handle clean hospital passings away, typically where you die in your sleep or whatever the case is. I'm the guy that deals with all the other stuff. So the investigations themselves can be challenging. You never know what it is you're going to come up on. And typically speaking, you don't always know what's going to upset you, because even though I've been doing this for almost a decade, some things hit you unusually when you're in the midst of the investigation. The other challenging thing about my job tends to be dealing with families, since inevitably I have to work with whoever the next of kin is, and that can be someone that was really close to the person. That can be someone that really doesn't like the person because of their family situation. It tends to vary, and you get a variety of reactions from both of those things. So navigating the family dynamics that you're quite literally often walking headfirst into without any information about is particularly challenging sometimes.
I want to take a look at all of those. I would like to start with what you said first about how something hits you in a way that you're not expecting. If you can give specific examples, that's fine. But can you give us a little more detail on that? I think it's just interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, I kind of break that down into two groups of things. Sometimes when you're doing a death investigation, you'll have a particularly visceral reaction to something that you see or you smell or you touch or whatever the case is. So
Right.
that can be everything from dealing with a particularly decomposed body that just you end up with a really unpleasant reaction to the smell or the touch or whatever the case is. And generally, I've been blessed with the ability to kind of walk that off. But sometimes something just smells a particular way or feels a particular way, and it can be really unsettling.
I see.
The other side of that is usually not so much that what you're dealing with is particularly unpleasant, but because it has some sort of emotional connection to your life.
Hmm.
So usually my coworkers, you sort through us and pick out who doesn't like doing particular investigations. It's not that they can't do them and do them professionally, but there are some investigations that we just really do not enjoy handling in any way, shape, or form. One of my coworkers has young children. He really
Right.
does not like doing child deaths investigations of any kind because it's emotionally trying for him in comparison to other death investigations.
Yep.
Minor suicides. I have a lot of trouble emotionally when it comes to dealing with suicides. A combination of my faith background and just my personal life. So those are really trying emotionally, and they can kind of sneak up on you. And sometimes you just run into a situation or a scenario that when you come up onto it, it ties into your life in a fashion that you weren't expecting. And you just have to kind of work through that emotionally and do the job.
I think that's interesting because people in a variety of different walks of life sometimes get blindsided in daily circumstances in ways that they weren't expecting. So it's just interesting for you to go into that. The next part of your answer was around working with the next of kin.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the main reason I wanted to have you on the show, is because you spend your career day after day having difficult conversations with people. And obviously, the folks who are listening to the podcast rarely, if ever, will have a conversation with someone whose next of kin has just died. But I'd like to talk with you about how you go through that process. So how do you go through that process of working with the next of kin and having those difficult conversations?
Right. So that kind of varies in terms of the process itself because every investigation is unique. It really is. I mean, you can draw similarities from them the longer you do it because some things remain the same or at least consistent. But usually I have two scenarios. I have a scenario in which I'm face to face with the next of kin and I am delivering the bad news, either because they're the ones that found their family member deceased, or they've shown up because they were looking for them for whatever reason. And then I have to kind of get a handle on where they're going to be emotionally and tell them, okay, this is what we found so far. This is what I'm going to do. This is sort of the next couple of steps here. The other scenario that I encounter probably more often that is having to have a phone conversation with the next of kin. And that sometimes that's as straightforward as I have to call them out of the blue. They have no warning. There's nobody there with them or anything like that. And I just have to tell them because it's been difficult for me to locate them. They live in another state. I don't know very much about who the phone number belongs to. I'm just sort of guessing based on a couple of law enforcement tools we have access to. Usually I'll get names and phone number or address, things like that. And then I have to look at people's age, where they live, whether or not I've found any information from the household or from the person that's deceased about who these names might be. And then I kind of have to make an educated guess. So if somebody's really close in age to the person, I might be looking at a spouse, I might be looking at a brother or a sister. If they're 20 to 30 years older, I might be looking at a parent or like an aunt or an uncle or something like that. If they're younger, I may be looking at a child or a younger sibling. It's just a matter of kind of figuring that out. And then I have to make that phone call. Sometimes if I'm lucky, what I can do is I can contact like a local law enforcement agency and have them send somebody out to say, hey, this person has passed away. We need you to call the investigator that's handling that case. And then from there, they know, okay, so-and-so is dead. And now I need to call this person. And then at that point, they've kind of been prefaced with this person is dead. And then it's a matter of me explaining what exactly has happened to them.
Let me just ask real quick. So you got basically two types of conversation. One is face-to-face, one is over the phone.
Mm-hmm.
Does the face-to-face one, does that typically take place relatively soon after you've come on the scene, so to speak?
Almost immediately, most of the time. So it's actually relatively rare for me to do an in-person death notification. Typically, that's handled by our chaplaincy.
Okay.
We have a couple of them, but Usually, if I'm having an initial face to face conversation with family members, it's because they are there. And that's because they woke up in the middle of the night and their partner's not breathing. It's a variety of situations. But usually in those cases, family has found the person either in some state of duress or they found them deceased. And that's almost always the first conversation that I have when I get wherever the investigation is happening. I'll talk to law enforcement beforehand, usually outside of the building or right outside of the scene, whatever it may be. And then I'll talk to family immediately after that. Because what I have found in the time that I've been doing this is that they almost always want initial information. So they may have been told something by law enforcement, but they don't really have an idea of what the process is after someone's died. So typically what will happen is I'll go and I'll talk to them and I'll tell them, hi, my name's Harrison. I'm the investigator that's handling this case. I'll identify them, make sure I know who they are. So if it's sister, brother, mother, whatever the case is, make sure I know who I'm talking to. And then I'll get whatever their initial information or reaction is.
So then you're trying to read them as you're going into the conversation?
Yeah, I almost have to, because there's this basic principle in death investigation that it boils down to treat everything like it's a homicide. Because if a family member has found this person, we really don't know what exactly has happened until we get into the investigation. Right. So I have to sort of gauge from that person whether or not they're having an appropriate grief reaction. And that can be a variety of things.
Hold on a second then. So tell me about that. What's an appropriate grief reaction?
So, like I said, it can be a variety of things. It can be everything from falling on the floor and crying. It can be shock. I've had some people that just simply, they don't know what to do with themselves. They're not crying. They're not having any emotional reaction at all. They're just trying to process the fact that somebody is dead. And then everything in between, just basic tears, inability to kind of think through what exactly is happening. So sometimes when you do your initial interview with someone, they will have trouble ordering their events. And it's not because they're lying to you per se. It's usually because they're still like thinking through what it is that has led up to this, because they're still processing like finding someone deceased. And then they have to kind of put that aside and backtrack. So sometimes you'll see people that will struggle to order the events that led up to it. And in this day and age, thankfully with tech, they can kind of take a look at their phone and go, okay, this is when I called this person. This is when I texted this person.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
In your experience, how long does it take someone to go through that ordering process? Because many times I know you can get into a confrontation with someone, let's say in construction or something like that, and you're asking them about an incident and it comes out differently than somebody else is explaining it. So how long does it usually take for someone to figure out that order and to get a degree of coherence there?
Depends upon the person. I'm sure that's not the answer that you want.
No. It's good. This is great. No.
Sometimes it is as fast as I talk to them. They tell me kind of what's going on, what their initial reactions are, what all they get out initially. And then I go and I do my investigation. I come back and we have a conversation and they've figured it out. Sometimes it takes days. I've had investigations where I've talked to the family initially, gotten all the information, kind of ordered it for my purposes, and then gone back because I will do follow-up interviews with family before I close cases. Right. And just to see what it is they say, because I'll go through my notes and I'll walk them through what they said or what we talked about initially. And then that gives them the opportunity to say, oh no, we went and found this thing, or no, I thought that initially, but this is what happened. And typically speaking, when I'm working with like next of kin that we've determined are not involved in a homicide or anything like that, they're pretty good about making sure they're correcting information because they want the information to be correct. So after they process for a day or two or three or whatever, a lot of people are good at going back and thinking about it or looking for more information about it because they want to know what happened. So that willingness to help is usually what orders things for them.
Interesting. That's interesting. Okay. How do you know when someone's lying to you?
Well, there are typically two ways that I determine that. Sometimes it's a feeling, and then I find something that contradicts what they're saying. Sometimes I just find something that contradicts what they're saying, and then I will go back and present it and see what they say. When you talk to people for a living about uncomfortable things, and you can ask this of the majority of law enforcement, and it turns out there's actually a science to figuring out when people are lying, but the majority of interrogators or law enforcement or things like that will acquire this sense over the course of their career because they spend so much time talking to people in interviews or interrogations or things like that, that they will naturally start to pick up on like facial expressions and body language that indicate when someone's being deceptive. And I'm really a layperson at this. This is all just me having done a little bit of research over the years. But usually the thing that's the best for me is I will talk to the person and they'll tell me a story, because that's really what I want people to tell me, is what their version of events are, whatever the case is. And then I will go and look at the environment and see if that story matches the environment. Because if someone is telling me, well, I just found him an hour ago, I talked to him 2 hours ago, like he's recently dead, and I go in and do my investigation, I find out, well, he has what we refer to as fixed rigor. It's a stiffness in the body that happens after death, and we use it to judge timelines and things. If he has fixed rigor mortis, he's been dead for at least 12 hours. So then I know that story's either you're lying or you're misremembering things. And that is then when I can kind of put that together with, okay, is this person appropriately grieving? Are they sad and they're saying, oh, I just saw him 2 hours ago and now he's dead. And in reality, they saw him like at noon and now we're pushing midnight because they called 911 at 6 o'clock and it's been 2.5 hours of investigation. It took me an hour to drive out there and now he's in rigor. Or are they genuinely saying like, I know I saw him 2 hours ago and he was alive and he is in fully fixed rigor? Because that's kind of how we have to discern when someone's not telling us the truth, is we have to use the environmental like evidence. And then we have to determine, okay, is this person lying to us or are they just grieving? And that's affecting what it is they're saying because they don't remember the timeline correctly.
So you go to the misremembering idea first before going to the lying idea, if you don't have a whole bunch of evidence, if you're just kind of beginning the case. Is that right?
Well, honestly, I try not to make any sort of assumptions about what people are telling me up front, because the woman that trained me while I was still working for Sacramento County, she said something that stuck with me, because she would have people tell her like, oh, you know, this person's lying to you. And her thing was, whatever you tell me, truth or lie, even if I can tell that you're lying to me, what you're lying to me about and why is as important as when you tell me the truth. Because when someone lies to you, it tells you something about the investigation. Whatever they're lying to you about is important. There's something there that they don't want you to know for whatever reason. And it can be as simple as they're embarrassed, or as complex as they're responsible for this person's death in some fashion. Maybe they shot them, maybe they stabbed them, maybe they poisoned them, whatever the case is. But figuring out why someone is lying to you almost always tells you something about the death investigation. And that's the thing, is that what they're lying to you about is almost less important than their motivation for doing it. Because if you can discern what the motivation is, then you can kind of piece together what it is they're lying to you about anyways.
So interesting. How is it that you are able to lay aside your preconceived notions about an environment that you're entering into so that you can do your job effectively?
Practice that, and you just kind of have to believe it as best you can and kind of check your behaviors when you notice that. So like,
believe what? What are you believing?
That you're being unbiased when you're handling your investigation. Like that's that you really have to commit to being unbiased about it, because it's really easy to listen to what somebody has told you and come up with a series of assumptions about what it is you're walking into when that may not be reality. I mean, I had an investigation where the first responders were convinced it was a suicide. And by the time I got there and I had done my investigation, I was relatively certain that it might have been a natural death. And then during the process of handling the investigation, we had a moment where we were convinced it was a homicide until we ran some additional testing, and then it kind of came back around to being a natural death. But just the start to finish roller coaster, if you will, of trying to figure out what the heck had happened. At any point, had we just assumed it was one of those things, we might not have gotten the full picture. So you kind of have to force yourself to go, okay, this is what I'm being told. Is this actually matching what I'm seeing? And then even when you look at what you're seeing, you have to make sure you're not making assumptions about the missing pieces of it. There's a line, and I don't know if it's actually from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's writing, but it's from a decent Sherlock Holmes movie, and it goes something like, one twists theories to suit facts, not facts to suit theories. So the idea being that when I'm working on a case, I should be adjusting what my perception of the situation is, not what's actually in the situation. So I shouldn't be manipulating my ideas about, okay, this person has lividity in this position. Well, I've been told by this person that this has happened. And then I start to make an assumption about what I'm seeing, right? Like, oh, this person told me this, and I am seeing this. So I've defaulted to a particular assumption about it, when the lividity might actually be telling me something else. I'm just discounting it because somebody else has already said something.
That's another thing I'd like to talk about. So obviously you have to have difficult conversations with the people directly involved. But then as you come on scene, you've got law enforcement, you have first responders and all those kinds of things, and they've got their perspectives.
Yeah.
Now, you're relatively young and you do have a decade experience doing this, but how do you handle a situation where you're coming on scene and someone in authority has a certain point of view and perspective, and as you come on scene and you look at it and it may be a little bit different, that may lead to different perspectives, even potentially conflicts? How do you handle that?
So generally speaking, and this is my experience, and I've been pretty thankful for it, we are so specialized in terms of what we do that usually I don't have conflict with law enforcement and first responders, because my government code, what gives me my powers, is kind of wild in its scope, but it's really niche in what I can do with it. So usually law enforcement likes to play nice with me because I make their lives a lot easier, because when I'm handling my investigation, I don't need the same things that they need in order to do things. But generally speaking, the solution to someone that has a really like, this is what we want to do, this is how we want to do it idea about whatever it is we're doing, and then years of experience, whatever.
Yeah.
Deference works really well, because if there's a way for me to do what it is I need to do and let them have their way, then that's the way to go. Because I have certain things that I need from an investigation, and as long as I can get them, and as long as I am following my policy and procedure, if I have somebody that is asking for something in particular, like let's say I'm investigating a homicide, which are really complex investigations, and I have like a lieutenant or somebody out there that has some ideas about what they think has happened and what they want to happen in the investigation to achieve whatever goal it is they have in their head, I will do my best to make that happen. And usually part of that is communicating with whoever that is about what it is they want. And that's the first thing that I typically will do. That's what that initial conversation with law enforcement is before I have any conversations with family, is I'll get them to tell me, okay, this is what's going on. And then I'll get their read on family or witnesses or whatever the case is. And then almost always before the end of that conversation, I'll have some sort of discussion about, okay, what do you guys want from this? Like, is there evidence that you need to take back? Like, do you need his phone? Do you need drug paraphernalia? Are you guys taking the weapon? Are you towing the vehicle? Like, is there anything that you guys need to collect or you want from this investigation? Like, is there some way that I can do this? Like, do I need to wait on your CSI to come over to take these photos? Like, and then that way it gives them an opportunity to say, yeah, this is what we want. This is what we need. And that, in my experience, tends to completely avoid any sort of conflict. The very few number of times that I've had law enforcement decide that they want to do something in a particular fashion that is sort of opposed to what it is I'm doing is almost always when they don't want to do something. And usually at that point, my solution to that, because as you pointed out, I'm 26 years old. And while I've been doing this for a while, sometimes that's not readily recognized by like older law enforcement. And it's not their fault. They've been doing this for 20, 30 years, whatever the case is.
Yeah.
And they've been doing it for 20, 30 years. So usually at that point, my solution is to involve my boss, and not in like a, well, I'm going to get you in trouble sort of a way. It's usually the thing I've found that works best when I'm talking to someone that's been doing this for a long amount of time and they want to do something or don't want to do something, whatever it is. And I can't convince them that it's important for their investigation and important for my investigation. I will usually go, well, okay, so that's different than what our policy is. Let me call my boss and see if she'll let me do that, or if she has a better way of doing that, or something that you'll be more agreeable to. And then at that point, they're talking with somebody that they view as either a superior or an equal. And I get her on the phone, I explain the situation to her, I tell her what I need and why it's in conflict with our policy. And then usually she'll have a conversation with them over the phone and go, okay, so this is our policy, this is why we need this. And then hearing it from somebody else, or even having a conversation with that person and her going, okay, I see what you're saying and I see why you're saying it. We can do it differently this time. That's okay. That almost always is the last resort solution to that sort of conflict. But typically the reason that that's happening is because, as you pointed out, I am younger and I haven't been doing this for 30 years yet. And so involving someone else that's higher up on the food chain, or is paid more, whatever you want to call it, and who has had an equal amount of experience typically turns that conversation with whoever it is into a conversation between equals, as opposed to like somebody that they don't view as like the same level of experience as them, telling them, hey, we need to do this.
So you're not making it like an ego thing. You're just kind of working the system to get what you need.
Yeah. I mean, like a lot of these guys, it's not anything malicious. Like,
Yep.
the worst thing that I've ever seen is laziness.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, I can work around that. Like,
Yep.
if they're not going to collect the drugs, I'll collect the drugs. If they're not going to collect the firearm, I'll collect the firearm. Like, I can deal with that. That's not like, in terms of being malicious about something, like laziness is the easiest thing for me to combat. Usually the problem is a matter of not accepting that I'm saying something or asking for something or want to do something for a reason. Thankfully, that doesn't happen often, but usually when it comes from somebody that's has a cooler title or
Right.
more experience, that's typically enough to get somebody to change their view on something. I mean, it's the difference between hearing from your classmate, like, hey, this is how you solve this math problem, versus hearing from the teacher say, hey, this is how you solve this math problem. Like,
Yeah.
you just automatically have a different reaction to people in a particular position than you do to people that are basically equivalent to you in terms of their position.
As you're coming on scene, do you have any personal routines that you go through to prepare yourself as you're kind of driving up?
Yeah. So what I tend to do is I take a ton of notes, because while we do have like digital photographs and we have a browser-based system for putting all of our reports in and everything like that, if for whatever reason something happens, something doesn't get documented or whatever, if I have it on my notes, then we're good to go. And what I will do is typically I'll have a conversation with law enforcement before I even get out there, and I'll get as much information as I possibly can. So drive time is usually me ordering my thoughts by writing everything down so that I can see, because I have a note paper that has basically fill in the blanks so that I don't forget to ask a question or whatever the case is. But when I'm driving there, I'll usually spend the first couple of minutes ordering my thoughts by filling in everything that I possibly can, and then looking at, okay, what do I need to find out? Right? Because there's a lot of that information that's like paperwork related. It has to be in my reports. And then once I get all of those things figured out, I can then focus on, okay, what about this scene, this investigation is really going to be important in terms of understanding what's happened. And then after I'm done with that, usually what I will do is I'll spend the rest of the drive time working with my intern. So we have interns that work for our office, and they're there to do investigative support for us. So they take photos. Sometimes they handle the bodies. They do basically anything we ask them to within reason. And usually what I will do is I have them drive our vehicles, because we don't have code 3 vehicles, so they can't go lights and siren or anything like that. And I'll let them figure out how to navigate the county. And then I'll use that drive time while they're navigating to kind of It can be anything from me just talking at them about what we're potentially walking into and the important things. Some of our senior interns, it turns into more of me quizzing them on what's important to see where their knowledge base is at. Once they've experienced a couple of different things, they can start differentiate on certain investigations what's going to be important, like what we're looking for, why we are. And then usually we'll go over anything that's like potentially hazardous on the scene. So if we're going into a household that is probably an IV drug user's house, like we'll have a conversation about, okay, we're not going to touch anything. Like we're going to be really careful where we step, that sort of thing. And then that serves as a reminder for me as well. Going from case to case to case, sometimes it's nice to be able to talk to somebody else and go, okay, so these are the things we're going to worry about. And mentally, I'm going, okay, these are the things we're going to worry about on the way over there.
It's interesting. So you're going into a conversation with someone that's difficult. What is your end goal with that conversation? Do you want to do anything more than just communicate the information to them? Or is there anything more that you want to accomplish?
Yeah. So typically the conversations initially are exactly that. They're usually information communication, but for the most part, when I have an initial conversation with a grieving family member, 90% of that's going to fall out of their head. So there's almost always a follow-up conversation on day 2 or day 3 where we have to review the same information. But ultimately, the initial sort of conversation that we have once I'm done with my investigation is me sorting out what I've found and letting them know what it is. But before I leave, typically what I want is to get them to a state where they feel like if there's something that comes up or if they need help or whatever the case is, that I'm somebody that they can actually count on to help them. Because a lot of the time when you deal with like law enforcement or whatever the case is, their caseload is much higher than mine is. They will go, okay, we'll take the theft report. Maybe I'll call you back if I find something, but I'll let you know when the report's ready. It's a lot more involved for us. So what I have found is that when I'm working with people that are upset because someone has died, I'm better off getting to a point with them where they feel like they can talk to me and that I'm like calming and stable to be around, because then if they need help, like figuring out a funeral home situation or trying to find the person's keys, or what do I do about the household? Like, how do I get it secured? That sort of thing. Like, then I know things are happening correctly because they're calling me and they're going, okay, I have this problem. Like, how can I solve this? Or what resource do I need to solve this? Or who else can I talk to solve this? Because what I don't want is to ever leave a family member in a position where they're unstable and potentially unsafe for whatever reason. Anything from like, well, my wife's dead, what else do I have to live for, to, well, my children have to know and I'm hysterical and I'm going to jump in the car and drive like that.
Right.
Those are all things we want to avoid. And usually, if I'm not the one that's getting the person to that point, I make sure that I have a chaplain there to get them to that point.
Right.
And that's typically when I will then say, okay, I'm taking off. And sometimes that means that I have to have them call a family member to come out and sit with them or whatever the case is. But it's a matter of judging like the emotional stability there, because once my investigation's done, it's like people aftercare, basically. Like somebody has died. So there's a level of trying to get them to a state emotionally where they can function. It's not so much that I'm getting them to feel better. I'm just getting them to a point where they can continue to work and get to a point where they feel better.
Is that typically within the realm of responsibility for a coroner, or is that something that you take on more than another person? How does that work?
It varies. There are some death investigators that just do their job.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, personally, I think that this is part of the job. And I'm blessed to work in a county where I have the time, where I'm not looking at my watch because I've got another car crash or something like that that's on the heels of this investigation. And I really do have to go, okay, sorry for your loss, bye. And sometimes that's just reality in certain situations. Like if I have a crash that's shutting down 5 lanes of a freeway and I have the highway patrol calling me to get out there and do this removal, like unfortunately I can't spend the same amount of time with a family member that I might normally to make sure they're completely stable. And that is investigator discretion at that point. How much time you're going to spend talking to family, getting them wherever in terms of their emotions is ultimately up to the investigator. Our job is to do the investigation, advise the next of kin of the situation, advise them of the cause and manner, and then provide whatever resources we need to provide for them to finish handling this. And nowhere does it say that we have to make sure that they feel better about the situation or anything like that. But at least in my experience, part of doing a good job is doing that. And you're not always going to achieve that because sometimes people have certain situations that prevent you from doing that. But at least making the effort and at least trying to reach them like in a fashion that's effective is, I think, part of the job. I think it's not in the job description. You can read the job description. It's pretty sterile and straightforward. But
Right.
I think if you're going to be an effective death investigator, you have to be able to do that like post-investigation care, because these are the people that are going to paint that picture for you to write your report and close out the last chapter of someone's life. So I think it's essential to the job, but I know that there are investigators that don't do it.
That's interesting. A couple more things I want to ask you about. Your demeanor, and you and I know each other, so I know your demeanor is a fairly steady demeanor.
Mm-hmm.
Is that typical for most death investigators, or do you, because I'm kind of a fiery guy, I'm kind of emotional, and other people I know are, there's a whole spectrum, obviously, but your kind of demeanor, is that typical for a coroner, or do you know some people who are kind of more fired up than you are?
So I would say that the majority of my coworkers are more animated than I am, but I can tell you that almost every death investigator I've ever met, when I see them working a scene, they've cultivated a really really level and steady outward demeanor, as you said, because that kind of is, if you're in the middle of a storm, like that's what you have to have in order to kind of control everything and be a calming presence, because you know what's going on. This is what you do for a living. Everybody else is experiencing the worst day of their life for the first time. Like, I have very animated coworkers when they're not in the middle of doing their job. I think that I've probably carried this in and out of my job a little bit more just because that's how I am as a person.
Yeah.
But it's a really helpful tool because there are only so many things you can bring to bear in a situation in which someone has died that are effective, and being calm is the only way to sort of encourage that in other people around you.
So then how do you separate the intensity and the challenge of your vocation with the rest of your life? You're married, you have other stuff that you do. Is there a big separation there, or how do you handle that emotional aspect of it?
Well, so I can tell you what I do, and then I can tell you what your options are. I don't separate it. I probably should more, but I'm lucky enough to have a wife that works for an ER.
Yeah, right.
And our conversations are
Your dinner conversations are quite entertaining, I bet.
Yeah. And I can just talk about it. I can tell my wife, these things have happened. Like, this was particularly difficult for whatever reason. And she gets it. She may not be dealing with people that are dead all the time, but she's dealing with people that are dying.
Yep.
And everything that goes into that, to dealing with family members that are absolutely crazy because they have an injured or dying family member. And then even the people that she's trying to treat that are being difficult for whatever reason.
Yep.
So that, for me, is the easiest way to handle things. Like, I usually have somebody that I'm talking to about whatever it is that's going on. And even if it's not something that bothers me, even if it's just day to day, like, I have an investigation and it's pretty straightforward for whatever reason, like, I'll usually tell my wife about it. But I've also surrounded myself with, sort of by necessity, people that are okay with listening to what it is I do, or I at least okay with it. Some of them are actually relatively interested in it. So when I start telling a story or whatever the case is, they're engaged with it, as opposed to going, okay, Harrison, like, I don't want to hear about that. Like, generally people like that don't spend a lot of time around me. So I don't have them like in the circle of people that I spend time with and talk to, because I'm pretty, at least of late, upfront with what it is I do and sort of what goes into that.
In other words, to handle it, you do talk about it with people, and you're selective, obviously, about who you talk to, but you have, to one extent or another, put people in your life or have people in your life that you are able to talk to.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some conversations that some people can handle and some conversations that other people can't. I mean, my wife she can take it all. Some of my friends are like, okay, that you can tell me in general terms what has happened and I'll listen to it, but please no specifics. But I mean, that's how I learned to handle it. And a lot of that, again, stems from the gal that kind of taught me how to do this to begin with, because she was someone who would go home and do the exact same thing. But she used to jokingly, after we would be finished with a particularly whatever scene, violent, nasty, emotional, any of those things, she would do this thing where she'd stop like probably 2 hours before the end of the shift and turn around. Because she had a big enough desk where I'd sit there and I'd work on whatever, and she'd sit and she'd work on her computer. And she'd turn around and go, okay, you want to talk about your feelings or anything before we go? And it came off as a joke, but it was her genuinely going, okay, like, if you need to talk about something, like, now's the time. I'm here for you.
Right. So it's good to have that kind of support there, even amongst your peers at work, so that you guys can process things together, huh?
Yeah. And I mean, I have a chaplain on my phone. I talk to him probably once a month about a variety of things. Anything from like, oh, hey, I need you to help me with this notification or whatever, to like, hey, he just wants to talk. So that's kind of our safety net. Like technically we have chaplain, and that is what they are there for. Like they're the ones that are supposed to sort of take care of us, which I think that on a certain level, a lot of people in my profession are probably, well, I'm the person that is supposed to be able to handle everything.
Right.
So we have a tendency to kind of be like, well, I don't need to talk to a chaplain. And then we figure it out ourselves, however it is we're going to do it. I mean, one of my coworkers, he's great at his job, knows exactly what he's doing, but he's a compartmentalizer. While he's at work, and he's on and he's got it, and he's a great investigator. And then Friday at 5 o'clock, off goes the computer, out goes the email on what needs to happen while he's not in the office. And then dude's done. He puts it all away and he goes home and he enjoys himself and spends time with his family and has a normal life. And then come Monday morning at 7 a.m., like on the computer goes again, and he's back to it. And that works for him. He's been doing it for 16 years, something like that. And as far as I can tell, that seems to be how he functions. And then you get varying degrees of that across everybody. Some people just forever are working. My boss is like that. She doesn't know how to turn it off. And I can't tell you whether or not that's a good or a bad thing, but she's always ready to go. She's always stable, and she always seems to be vested and invested in what it is she's doing, even if she's on vacation. Like she took 3 days off for her birthday, and I got an email from her because she was reading one of the pathologist's reports and she caught some mistake in it. So it varies, but it's a matter of like the investigator has to figure out what's going to work for them to keep doing their job without losing their minds.
That's interesting. So a couple more questions here. So let's say you're in an extreme situation, tensions are really, really high. What do you do to diffuse that situation?
So this is always going to be a case-by-case situation. And generally speaking, when you're talking about what you're talking about, it breaks down into two general categories of situations. And this is not a lay person kind of a breakdown, because I end up in situations that are a little different than the average person most of the time.
Of course.
If there is something high tension, it really comes in two different types. One is I have a family member that's having some sort of crisis. And that can look like them screaming, crying, falling on the floor, throwing things, whatever. Like that is one situation. The other situation looks like something has happened and there are people that are potentially dangerous. So if I'm investigating like a drug overdose or something like that, and there are people in that household that have a criminal history or whatever the case is, and we've got law enforcement out there, that's already a really, really high tension situation, because somebody's died and chances are it's because they were doing something illegal. And everybody knows somebody's got drugs somewhere, somebody's got paraphernalia somewhere. And now we've got some guy that's in here asking questions of everybody, like, hey, when was the last time he smoked meth? When was the last time he shot up heroin? Like, when did you see him last? Like, what time? Like, did he have a needle sticking out of his arm that you removed? That's all like way more than any of the people that I'm typically talking to in situations like this ever want to hear. They don't want to answer your questions because you're a cop. And then I do have genuinely two police officers with me that are guns, badges, uniforms, the whole nine yards. So that situation on its own is by necessity tense, because if you've got meth on you and I'm doing an investigation in why this person is dead, I'm asking you, like, does he smoke meth? And you've got these two police officers who are trained to kind of eyeball people for carrying controlled substances, like all the things that you're not supposed to do. If you say one thing and they start asking questions, then it's like, okay, like, is somebody going to jail? And usually what my solution to that is, there's either two situations. The one is sort of by necessity, and that is when I have people that are truly uncooperative or potentially dangerous. And then I have to sort of use law enforcement like a shield to do my investigation. And maybe I don't get to talk to the people that are involved nearly as much, or maybe I have to talk to them one-on-one, where it's me and them, a guy with a gun and a taser. And that's not always a productive conversation.
Right.
And then the second solution is to differentiate myself from law enforcement in a meaningful fashion. So if I've got a situation like this, maybe I get somebody that seems the most emotionally stable for whatever reason,
right,
and I'll talk to them. I'll leave the 3 or 4 other people out on the front porch with one of the officers. I've got an officer inside, but maybe he's watching the body or whatever the case is. And then I'll have this conversation with this person and I'll tell him, hey, look, I'm a death investigator. I don't care if you're smoking meth with him. That's fine. I'm not going to arrest you for it. That's not the purview of what it is I'm doing. Right. And I'll make it clear to them that it's not about them. It's about your friend who's in the back who's dead.
Right.
That's what I care about. I care about him. I care about finding out what happened to him. And I'm going to catch it. Like, if he was doing drugs, I'm going to know. I'm going to run his blood. We're going to get the toxicology report. We'll find out. So if you tell me beforehand he was doing drugs, then whatever, I will know that. But usually the way to diffuse that tension is to get people out of whatever the situation is. Typically it's outside.
Yeah.
And then just have one of my officers sit on that. Don't interact with them. Leave them be. If they want to talk to you, fine, whatever. But just let them chill. Let them not be in the situation where there's a dead body on the floor 3 feet from them, and let them talk to each other. That's fine. I don't care if they talk to each other. And then I can sort of target the people that I need to talk to that have information, because usually when I'm talking to a group of people, what I will get is a series of things where this person says, okay, well, I saw him at this time. Well, I got a text from him at this time, and I'm like, whatever. Then, and that can be useful if I'm trying to kind of put together a timeline or something like that, or get a sense of who it is I'm dealing with. But generally speaking, I can kind of pick out the person that is either the most emotionally stable or has the most information. Like, they saw what happened, they were talking to him right before it happened, or whatever.
And so then you'll separate them out of the situation.
Yeah.
And then you'll work with them in that environment, and you'll talk to them in such a way so that they understand that you're not there to arrest them or to investigate any criminality.
Yeah.
Well, it's not exactly any criminality, is it? I mean, because you're going to see some criminality, aren't you? I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, like, anytime you walk into a situation like this, and the easiest one to have this discussion about is a drug overdose, typically.
Yeah.
Because if someone is living in a household where that's a common thing, you're going to see paraphernalia. You're going to see, like, the meth pipe. You're going to see the creme brulee blowtorch that's used for, like, liquefying your solid meth or whatever it is. Yep. And I'm not dumb. The officer's not dumb. The person we're talking to is not dumb. But it's sort of like, we all know what's going on here. We're all aware that this person did drugs. You might do drugs. That might be your pipe. But it's different in a death investigation, right? Like, I'm there to figure out what's happened. So it's kind of like everybody has just agreed to push the pause button on, like, you're going to jail and you're doing whatever, and until I'm done. And then I leave. I take the person with me. I give somebody my card, whatever the case is, and I try and figure out my side of the investigation. And then it's like a timer. And after a certain amount of time, then the game is back on. So if you smoke some meth and jump in your car and drive off, and one of the officers pulls you over,
right,
like, the timeout is over. Like, it's back to the usual. But that's sort of like, sometimes you have to establish that, right? Like, and sometimes that's the officer saying, hey, it's cool. Don't worry about it. I will catch up with you another day. I understand you've got something on you or whatever that normally we would arrest you for, cite you for, or whatever. But he's doing a death investigation. We're not here for that. sometimes it's me saying that because it's difficult occasionally to differentiate between what I am and what a normal deputy sheriff is. But almost always that conversation either occurs in a situation where I'm talking to a group of people and I have to say that to all of them so
Right.
they all understand the rules, unspoken rules of this interaction, or I have to separate somebody out and have that conversation with them. And usually that's enough. Usually once people have been moved out of the scene and they can sit and talk to each other and not feel like they're being watched by law enforcement, that typically diffuses it. And then once I have somebody out and away that I can talk to and tell them, like, hey, I'm not like a normal cop, like, this is what I'm doing, that brings their anxiety down and then they will talk to me. But a lot of that is sort of environmental management in terms of how and who you're talking to and when, because it's really easy to get like confrontational when you
Right.
have law enforcement that's used to having a really strong command presence because
Yes.
that's what they have to have.
Yes.
But that doesn't really work for our investigations. Like, it's a lot more finesse than having just a strong command presence. And don't get me wrong, sometimes we have to have a command presence. Like, if
Right.
there's somebody that's like wandering into a room where we're doing an investigation or whatever the case is, like, I have to be able to turn it on as well. But that's something that I don't usually use because I don't need to. Typically, I
Right.
have law enforcement that can manage that sort of thing. But a lot of my sort of conflict de-escalation is a matter of moving people out of the situation and then like separating them and calming them down individually.
So then just as we wrap up here, Harrison, what are 3 action items that we can take away here that would really help us to prepare for what you do all day, every day, which is having difficult conversations? What are 3 pieces of advice or 3 action items you can give us?
Yeah. So number one is absolutely, and it's going to sound sort of intuitive, but it's a lot more difficult to do in the moment than you might think. You got to stay calm. I mean, in dealing with anybody. And that's not to say I remain emotionless,
Right.
but regardless of what the situation is, being the calm voice of reason in the room is almost always the position that you want to be in, because when you're dealing with someone that's high on emotions, like, you have to be stabilizing for them. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere. The second thing is to understand what it is they're going through as best you can. Like, it's obviously, I have no children, so I don't know anything about what it feels like to have a child die on me. But I mean, I think a lot of people have had pets die in their life.
Yep.
I think that a lot of people have had other people die in their life. So
Sure.
about finding sort of a parallel experience that you can draw on and think like, okay, how was I feeling in that moment? Like, what was going through my head, and like, how
Right.
can I apply this to the conversation I'm about to have?
Yep.
And then sort of following on from that on the third one is respecting that the person is having a moment of vulnerability, really. Like, when you're in that situation where you're in crisis and you're the emotional one, you would hope that the person that's dealing with you is
Yes.
calm and has it all together, but that they're also understanding that regardless of who you are or what it is you do with your life, be it like a CEO or you're driving a tractor, whatever, that you're a person and that it's important to understand that, like, at some point in your life, like, the positions will be reversed. So you want that person to treat you with the respect and to understand, like, you're a person. It's just that right now, like, something horrific has happened or whatever the case is, and that they should still be treating you like they would if you weren't in crisis, like, in terms of how they're thinking about you.
Excellent. So stay calm, put yourself in their shoes, and then respect their vulnerability.
That's
Yeah,
about
that's
it.
tremendous. I really appreciate that. One last question. I didn't ask you this at the beginning. I probably should have. Why did you get into death investigation?
So I get this question a lot, and it's a lot more straightforward than I think people are expecting. I knew I wanted to work in law enforcement in high school, but I really did not want to chase people, wrangle people, taser people. I was really not interested in having the people I was trying to deal with try and run away from me,
Yeah, right.
because that just was not my thing. I was not terribly confrontational, and I just had very little interest in that. But I was really interested in the investigating. So I had a friend in high school whose mother was the supervising deputy coroner at Sacramento County. And so I hear you're interested in law enforcement. Well, you got to know if you're going to be able to handle a dead body. Would you like an internship?
That's a good approach.
And so I went, okay, like, fine, it's investigative experience. Like, and I'm going to be around the worst possible scenario. Somebody's dead. So this should be good for me, despite what I decide to do. And after 4 years of working there and being in college, I realized that I was actually pretty good at it.
Huh.
So I just kind of stuck with it at that point.
That's cool. Awesome. Well, Harrison, I really appreciate your time. The insights you've shared have been really tremendous. And I know this is a nice change of pace for my audience. So they'll have many things they can take away from what you've shared here today. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you for listening to Construction Genius today. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Harrison and you walked away with some key insights into how to have difficult conversations. If you're a construction company owner, think about the folks in your organization who are either in leadership roles or coming into leadership roles. To make that shift from building projects into a leadership role where you're more responsible for building people and teams can be a deep challenge for many people. And that's why I've developed a leadership program called The Shift. If you'd like to learn more about that program and to see if it's something that would be a fit for the leaders in your company, please contact me on my website, constructiongenius.com/contact. Put your details in there and we can jump on the phone for 10 minutes, figure out if or how I may be able to help you with the development of the leaders in your organization. Because you know that the profitability of the projects that you run day in and day out are a direct reflection of the quality of the leadership that you have in your company. So if there's a way to develop that leadership and to upgrade it, that's something that you want to pay attention to. So reach out to me on my website and contact me. Thanks again for listening to Construction Genius.